Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the latest episode, and today's guest is Randy Frisch. Thanks for joining us, Randy.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm excited to be here. I'm a little rusty on my podcasting for the first time in quite some time, so had to make sure the mic was working, the whole deal.
Well, I think we got it all sorted, and so we'll jump right into it. So, for those who are unfamiliar, you are the co-founder of Uberflip, and I'm curious to set the stage. Tell us a little bit about what Uberflip is, and how you came to found it. Is it 11 plus years ago?
Mm-hmm. It was back in 2012. So I feel like I'm rusty on this too for the first time in a long time, because I just exited the company I co-founded in the last couple of months. I haven't been talking about it as much as I used to, which was every moment of the day. But I came to getting involved in the company partly out of the gate. I'd say it was more about I wanted to be in the tech space. I wanted to be in a disruptive area. And when I got together with my co-founder, his name's Yov, the two of us, I think we ended up gravitating to a problem that we could relate to and a problem that we were passionate about. The last thing that I kind of learned along the years, and I know we'll talk not just about, Uberflip and, marketing, but, entrepreneurial mindset, is the last thing that I realized is really important when you're going down this road across both of those different priorities of digital marketing and entrepreneurship is you got to have a strong point of view. And I say that to every marketer who I've worked with over the last number of years. Many who I was really humbled to work beside and see their point of view. Or when someone didn't, I was like, well, if you don't have a point of view, then no one cares. And I think that was, back to Uberflip. My point of view was that getting content online, and I'm talking about ebooks, blog posts, videos, and all the other forms of content that came along, it was really hard to do for people who were not technical. And I was not technical. As much as I wanted to be in tech, that's just because I like tech. I like the cool new thing. It's not that I knew how to code, and I still today don't.
And it's not that you wanted to code either. It just
no. I wanted. I always say it in the early days of it. Back in university or undergrad, which for me was late 90s, early I graduated in 2002. I'm dating myself a bit, but the tech that I loved the most was PowerPoint. I mean, PowerPoint. There's a lot of other cool tools I think are cooler than PowerPoint today. But back then, PowerPoint made it really easy versus using Flash, which was the alternative, to actually pull together something that was a presentation of that sort if you wanted some sort of interactivity. Mm-hmm. And my view was, how do we do what PowerPoint did? And how do we do that for the web? And that really meant looking at a different buyer. A lot of the web systems back in those days, the CMSs were made more for the web developer. And I loved the web developers that I always got to work with, but I was so dependent on them. And Uberflip became the alternative to empower marketers to do this. And, even over the 10 years that we were, and the company continues to pursue this vision, the number of stakeholders that need to put the right content in front of the right buyer at the right time continued to change. It was definitely no longer just the web developer, but it wasn't even just the marketer anymore. It was the sales rep. It was the customer success rep. It was all the people that were trying to interface with people and really just convey that they had an understanding of what their problems were.
Well, that problem or pain point? Was it that inspired, as you said, could we be the PowerPoint for enterprise content management? Like the same sort of degree of popularity. I may be, but what I'm curious about is, was it a pain point you had experienced, or that you saw others experience that they had articulated their frustration? Maybe not directly, but.
Well, there's a couple pivotal moments to how we got to outlining that vision. One was when I joined my co-founder, he actually had a different business, and that's an important part in our history, even though it's not part of Uberflip, but he understood the PDF space. He was helping convert PDFs into magazines, actually. So media publishing side, where there's a lot of correlation, obviously, between the media world and the content marketing world. But for us, the first question was, and we were having trouble figuring out how we would make a go of that without getting into the details of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, well, who else has a PDF problem, right? Beyond media publishers, beyond magazine publishers, who else has a PDF problem? And believe it or not, still today, I think marketers have a PDF problem, even though we veered far away from just purely managing PDFs. But, at the time, there was this belief that the PDF would die and we had to convert the PDF into something more interactive. I mean, many of us still use them in our
even though
strategies.
A problem saving a Word document as a PDF, which is
Yeah.
the long-standing cliche or joke.
So one part was this element of, okay, well, we wanted to figure out something that was more of a fit for an area that we knew how to solve for, which was conversion of PDFs. Then the other element, once we started to play around, was who are we going to do this for? And that, I think, is where, to your point, that's where the mission and vision started to take shape. And many people have probably read or are familiar with The Innovator's Dilemma, which is a great book. And, it outlines the mindset of building for a buyer who's maybe not your buyer going forward. So a classic example is BlackBerry now, who is building the BlackBerry for very security-minded IT teams who would give it to their employees, only to get to a point where they realized that those employees would put that phone into their bag when they went home and take out their iPhone. Because iPhone realized that the real buyer here was the consumer, you and me, Andrew. And that really allowed iPhone and Apple to overtake BlackBerry because they focused on the fact that people didn't care about typing emails faster per se in that moment, the way the keyboard did, but they cared about these games and they cared about the apps and they cared about, the photos and all these other elements that was the consumer problem. And, so you take this back to what we were trying to do at Uberflip, we started to realize that it wasn't even for us about empowering these technical conversions of PDFs. It was about empowering a different user, as I said, being the marketer and eventually some of the other stakeholders that we solved for, who just kept coming to the table and saying, I have this problem too. And they were new buyers. And that was the opportunity. That was the entrepreneurial opportunity that we had, which was to solve for this shift.
Well, when you talk about having, as part of that shift, having that point of view, was it the point of view that was at the extreme end of a spectrum of points of view, or was it a contrarian point of view to what was going on at the time? I hope I'm making sense with that.
Yeah, I understand what you're getting at. I think, first of all, I'm going to apply this more broadly, as opposed to just what we were doing at Uberflip. I think the important thing is to get out in front of people and explain to them why you're different. And different doesn't have to always be new. It can also just be why you're doing it better. I've got in front of me over here a Yeti mug, right? My first job, right out of school, I worked for Rubbermaid. And I was a product marketer at Rubbermaid, and we all know Rubbermaid for its totes and things like that. One of the product lines that I was responsible for, though, was coolers. Thermoses, coolers, all this stuff. I can tell you, it was like one of our lowest margin areas because it was just this highly competitive and then clunky to ship item that, the margins just weren't there. We had like one product that was like overpriced and no one would buy. And that one we made a ton of money on, but we shipped none of it. And you look at this mindset of like, well, how do you change something that's not really that different, but how do you wrap around it just a different narrative and a different point of view on the lifestyle that this product, as an example, ended up having? And so many of us want that brand for so many different reasons. I think that they have a strong point of view. I can't articulate what it is because I just happen to have a mug in front of me, but
it's from, I'll call it, there's a utility product, a cooler in just generic terms, versus the Yeti.
Exactly.
There's some aspiration to it. There's, it symbolizes certain things when you're carrying it. Are you a Yeti person or a Stanley person? Or like just in all the connotations that come from that. So.
Exactly. I mean, if someone bought me, I think I have downstairs an Igloo mug. And honestly, it might be just as good as this Yeti for all I know. But I wasn't excited when it landed in my, I think it came as a direct mail piece from someone. I wasn't excited about it in the same way I was when I got that Yeti. Their brand ended up having this point of view on life and lifestyle and everything like that. Now, there's other technologies out there that change point of view to say, we're going to actually do something completely different. I don't think Yeti actually did something that different, although someone will for sure correct me and tell me that it's insulated in a different way, but that's not why I buy it. So there are other companies that say, okay, the way you're doing it is broken. And we actually, I think, if I look back at Uberflip and I think about both of those elements, we dipped our toes into both elements of trying to both change the way tech is approached on this and actually have a point of view that was really at times fun and silly and even a little bit of us crossing the line, if you will, in terms of typical etiquette. I mean, I wrote a book, where the book was called F Content Marketing. I don't know what the etiquette is here for F films. There you go. I don't know what the etiquette is here for dropping certain language, but
it's all right.
That to me was my mindset, that I needed people to realize that we had a strong point of view in terms of how things needed to be done. And I didn't just say that, there was a full thesis behind what we believed to be different and what we were trying to change in terms of not just the technology, but the role of people that were highly invested in content marketing and getting content at the door.
Well, and your example, and I mean, the legend has it that Lazaridis from BlackBerry or Research in Motion, you got a hold of the iPhone and tore it open and said, they've given people, I'm paraphrasing, a computer in their hand. And contrast that with a BlackBerry at the time, which was a secure messaging device.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very different.
Different buyer need.
Yeah, and different buyer experience. Fully respect, enterprise, secure messaging, yada, yada, yada. And Crackberry, as they called it, or the BlackBerry prayer, all these habits that went along with that, but that wasn't the same as the experience a person had with an iPhone. The surfing the web experience, the apps, the productivity, just everything that sort of spun out of that. But that same sort of frame of mind of trying to look at, or it was really a point of view, looking at who you're trying to serve differently than who's come before you. So when you look at the marketers you were serving, 10 plus years ago versus, you're a marketer too, where you see the state of content marketing now, are the pains somewhat the same, or the proliferation of content? What's your sort of take on how things have?
Yeah, I think there's been a huge evolution in what we expect content to be used for. So maybe we can zero in on that, in terms of your question. when we started, it was right around the time that HubSpot actually was taking off in a massive way. And if we can all recall, the term that they very much rallied around was inbound. Which today, if you fast forward, actually is a term that I don't think many people use or use in the same way. I mean, funny enough, I remember around maybe 2013, trying to hire marketers. And unless the job title had inbound marketing manager in it, like no one wanted that job. I don't think you could pay someone enough money to take that job today.
Well, I always find it ironic that HubSpot was purporting to be this, inbound marketing, godsend, and they were an outbound marketing machine.
It's so true. It's so true. But they got to us by making us realize the power of that inbound strategy. And that's part of any marketing strategy. And they had great people out there. I mean, people who I'm good friends with, like Marcus Sheridan, who, was selling swimming pools and, told these amazing stories of how his swimming pool company went from bankrupt to booming because he invested heavily in content. And by doing so, he ranked above all other companies, and all of his problems were solved because he then had HubSpot to handle that inbound interest. It was a great story, and it's true. It's completely true, but it was at a different time. And to your point, this was 10 years ago. The expectations 10 years ago were very different, not just from content, but also from personalization. 10 years ago, we would all get emails from these really big companies, and we'd be like, oh my God, it's so cool. They know my name. How'd they do that? Right? 10 years later, we're like, oh, how did this company get my name? Right? The mindset shifted from this is cool to I know how they do this. It's a mail merge. I know how databases work, and I know when they're screwing it up or they're doing it well. The bar raised in so many ways over the last 10 years in terms of, number one, personalization. And the second thing is where I expect content to be served to me. So we've gone from that inbound mindset to even companies like HubSpot, I believe, and I haven't looked at their website in a bit, so correct me if I'm wrong, but they talk about the inbound, they talk about, as you said, outbound or different language for that. They talk about customer success. They talk about more this full customer cycle of what is that experience for the buyer? How do we get them in the door? How do we get them through that pipeline? How do we get them to sign the contract? How do we get them to be a happy customer? How do we get them to renew? How do we get them to expand? And what I've seen in those 10 years, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier by saying more people needing a seat at the table who need to leverage content. We didn't see that in the same way 10 years ago. The closest thing was a support agent saying, I'm going to link you to my Zendesk help desk page for how-to articles, very technical how-to articles. Whereas now it's more about what are the best practices? What are the customer stories? Not that you just need to buy from me, but you need to really benefit from my solution, to continue to grow with my solution. So I think we've seen a huge shift there. And I actually think it's allowed content to have a more strategic seat at the table, because it's no longer just a tactic we use amongst many to generate lead generation or pipeline, but it's something that we actually need to really inject throughout that entire life cycle.
Well, to a certain degree, it's table stakes. And one of the things we've seen in our own client work is, or I'll call it kind of a shift in mindset, is getting people to have this reframing of, I mean, it comes to mind as like everything is content. Not literally everything is content, but I call it wearing the content hat. And that, someone from the team is going to a conference. Can they record a video on their phone about 3 takeaways from a session they were in? And they just take a couple photos saying that they're there. That might lead to a meeting or whatever, but just, the trade-off between lower production value and immediacy, and also the necessity of just different types of content in different formats, and to move away from this one and done. We wrote a blog, we published it to the website, and then we started on the next blog. We wrote a blog, then we tweeted it out, or we post it on LinkedIn once, and then we, start it again, versus every piece of content that we've invested in, let's squeeze as much value out of it as possible. And so we've just gotten busier with content, and I'm not suggesting it's necessarily a race to the bottom. It's getting noisier and more competitive. But to your point, when you're laying out all the different stakeholders, we're trying to convey to people, like, social is sort of the pointy end of the spear. A blog on your website, or I'll call it more foundational content, needs to be there, but then you have to figure out where else can it be deployed or distributed, and to get all the different stakeholders involved in, can we get content that's oriented towards recruitment, and just start writing off kind of a shopping list of all the different parts of the business that could benefit from content, but also be a contributor, even if it's just ideas in terms of content. Is it easy? No. But not to turn the tables to me, but that's part of my take on the evolution of what I've seen over the last decade. We've gone from a blog and a tweet to a full spectrum of activity as it pertains to content.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think back to this idea of point of view. One of my early point of views that I don't think is mine anymore, I think a lot of people have rallied around this, is that, and you hit on it, we need to move away from just being a content machine or a content factory of sort, in that the challenge becomes, we just keep posting to our blog and we expect people are going to come to our blog, and the most recent asset is going to matter. Now I'm going to date this podcast, which you're never supposed to do, but we're recording this on November 1st. I know it won't go out for a bit, so I apologize for ruining that. But the reason I want to call that out is there's a lot of companies who put out really spooky posts yesterday about Halloween and whatnot, right? So if someone put a Halloween post out yesterday and they don't write again for another week, right? Then chronologically, someone's going to come in, they're going to find that at the top. Yeah. The next asset is just going to be whatever is prior. So come tomorrow, the previous asset that they go to next is going to be Halloween potentially. That's wrong. Yeah. We need to package the right assets that people are actually expecting. And that's that next level of personalization that I hit on. I mean, it's no longer enough for me to send you an email and be like, hey, Andrew, you know how I did that. Yeah. But if I could actually say, hey, Andrew, here's a piece of content that I think you're going to care about right now based on what's going on in the world, in your industry, for your role, keep injecting all these, first party and third party data elements that I can understand about you. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to lean in. And that, I think, is where we've evolved to. Forget about content, from a digital marketing perspective.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins, Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
What I think you highlighted a moment ago when you talked about customer stories. And so if I'm a content marketer and I write a story or a case study highlighting the experience that one of our clients or customers had, and then a prospective client or a visitor to the website, to the blog, whatever, sees themselves in that same story, sees like a correlation between the two, then, it's not literal personalization, but again, it's about, Jay Baer, who you know well, talks about being the best answer. Can our content be, instead of being constantly promotional, can it be a resource? Can it be helpful? Can it be informative? Same thing with like Marcus Sheridan talking about differentiating between buying fiberglass versus concrete pools. Whatever the distinction, there the focus was on dispelling myths about pools, answering questions. And so they led with being helpful first, not selling. And even though that has evolved over time, it's a bad habit that many marketers still need to break.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, I want to talk about more more of the entrepreneurial slant for folks out there that have co-founded organizations. I'm curious to get your perspective on so Yov was already doing something, and so you joined forces, but was it something that he was doing that intrigued you, or you both looked at, we'll both leave what we're doing behind and start something net new? And part two to that is, how did you decide who would do what?
Good questions. I feel like it's important to say it was a very different time. And even though it was only about 10 years ago, I mean, look how far we've come with our devices. I mean, the iPhone, isn't that much older than that. So it was a very different time, even in, we're both Torontonians. Toronto did not have the tech scene that it does today, nor do many areas of the world where their tech scenes and accelerators and ways to get into tech have presented. So I'll be honest, I was desperate to get into tech. And for me, at first it was anyone who would give me that chance. I had done some really entrepreneurial things. I had done an MBA, but none of that mattered, for what I wanted to do. No one valued the prior business that I ran that was more traditional brick and mortar. No one really cared about my product marketing experience at a, consumer good company. No one cared about that MBA. It didn't matter for a lot of the tech rules that were out there in that moment. So
did you know Yo before that?
So Yo went to school with my wife, and we had a mutual friend between all of us who knew that Yo was looking for a business partner of sorts, and that's how we all got connected. So it was a small world.
Very organic.
Yeah, and that weaves to your second question on who was going to do what. Yov is a great leader, but also quite technical. And that was a skill that I've already spoken about I didn't have. I was very passionate about marketing, and I'd done a bit of sales, but not a ton, but enough that I understood, how a sales process worked and enjoyed that chase of it more than he did, and the customer facing elements that came with that. So I would say that, when we started, it was a little bit of working together, sitting side by side. And as the company grew, starting to take shape as to who would do what and where we drew a line. To be honest, more as we got traction, some of the lines we drew were not conventional. He was CEO, I was president, and in the early days I was COO before I became our chief marketing officer. But, we kind of said, let's each do what we're strong at and, get out of the way once we're not even strong at that ourselves. And that led to us hiring great people, in VP and C-level roles as we continue to grow.
Did you, sort of interject, did you agree? So if we reference the E-Myth Revisited, where you map out all the roles and you put names beside the roles, I mean, just figuratively, but did you say to yourselves, okay, we're each of us, these are our defined roles and responsibilities as of today, and we're going to revisit it in 3 months, 6 months, and we reserve the right to be candid with one another about, I think you're doing a great job there, but I also think you suck over here? Or did you have those kind of candid conversations?
We had great candid conversations. One of the things that we did, we kind of viewed it as neither of us reported into each other, which made our HRIS system just kind of messy. But that, we still made it work somehow. But, more so, a lot of those systems have just the base of, a 360 type review every year or quarterly check-ins, however you think about it in your organization. And we made sure that we always did one with one another. And we each played the role of, I guess, the reporting manager of each other, even though there wasn't that overly formal setup of saying that we report into each other. but it allowed us, as you said, to have those candid conversations, no different than you would have with someone you were accountable as a leader to.
Yeah.
To push each other, to ask those questions. Is this working? Is this not? What else could you do? What else could be supported to help you? And I think it's important to do that in a couple of ways. One, it holds you accountable. And second, I mean, it's sometimes lonely and tricky being the leader. And I'm not just saying the founder, like any leader.
Yep.
You don't have that same degree of mentorship and guardrails and guidance that you may have had coming up in your career. So it's important to find ways to get that. And if you're listening to this and that's not your co-founder, you don't have a co-founder, the other ways you can get that also is by having really good mentors outside the business. Or, if you don't have a formal mentor, it could be adding in really great advisors to the business, who you can go to and say, I'm struggling on this area. Can you help me, or who can you guide me to?
Well, even though you had each other to hold one another accountable, or even to, if you had a line of people reporting to you and he had a different line of people reporting to him, you could, compare notes, you could advise each other. But talk to me a little bit about outside advice that you may have, like mentors you had as either individuals or even just the organization, from like what sort of advisory support did you have?
Sure, I can give you a few examples. And I'll give you a few just because I think they're different forms that all helped in different ways. So one was, we had no idea what we were doing out of the gate, like, to be very honest. I mean,
Most people don't.
And so we failed at a lot of things, and one of them was definitely raising capital. And that ended up being for the best, because we bootstrapped the company quite far until we did a large funding round. We were well over 10 million recurring at that point. But in the early days, I remember there was a couple of VCs in the Toronto community, and some of them were just kind of, they weren't really nice about saying no, but that's their right to do so. And some were great about it. It wasn't just their no, it was them explaining why what we were doing was off or was wrong. One of those, to give you an example, was a guy named Peter Koresh, who at the time was at Omer's Ventures, and has gone on to do some other great things, including being involved at a company called Wave, and now is the co-founder of a company called Key that I'm an investor in. And as soon as Peter left Omer's, I was like, I need that guy to be my advisor. And we managed to bring him on as our first advisor. And it was the perspective he was able to give to us as an investor, even though he wasn't invested, but the ability to continue to go back without having that investor, but having that lens to what we were doing. And he's not the only one. There's a great guy named Lars Leckie, who's at Aspenwood Ventures out in the Bay Area, who took a role like that as well with us. Mark McLeod's another great guy like that who I leaned on. So there is great people who kind of understood how to scale a tech SaaS company that were really key to me being as successful as I.
But being able to say no, but saying why, and not only giving you the feedback at that this time they said no, but seeing something in the two of you and the company, and seeing enough to say, I think there's something here, and I want to play a role in nurturing it along, which...
Yeah, and some of these people who have mentioned, others who I haven't, even ended up writing small checks just to be part of the experience and part of the ride when we did a larger fund raising, because their funds were no longer applicable as the right funder of our business, but they were so involved that they wanted to show support and they wanted the upside. So that was great. And then there were others that, for me, given what I was doing, and back to this idea of point of view, there were people who I leaned on heavily to help me, really make sure that what I was talking about in the content marketing space and content experience, which is the term that we later coined, that it kind of passed the sniff test. And you mentioned one of those names already was Jay Baer. Jay became a really, today's a very good friend of mine. Ann Hanley's another good friend of mine. I'd say the two of them definitely stand out as great examples of people who also ended up being investors in our business. But but more so, I just went to them for advice and a sounding board. And sometimes they'd, push back in really effective ways, and they understood the space that I was in. They both helped, shape my career as well as what Uberflip became.
But over the course of that journey, when you would get feedback, how would you distill it and then act on it? Or did you filter and say, well, I appreciate the advice, and did you reserve the right to say no, to say no or ignore it?
So first off, I'll say that I think two of the hardest things we have to do is give feedback and take feedback. I still think I still think I suck at both of those. I'm always trying to work on getting a little bit better at both. And I'm sure some people who speak to will say I'm good at it, and some will say, yeah, I still suck at it. It's hard, and I'm one that takes things very personally. I'm really passionate, and I get excited about my ideas. So I also get really disappointed when they maybe aren't going to work. So for me, it became, the best thing I can say is it takes time sometimes when you're getting feedback, and it's important not to react in the moment. Something I still work on again, but the ability to digest that, whether it's by taking it and going and taking a walk or sleeping on it per se, I think those things are really important. Now, also, Asterix Aldous was saying it's someone else's opinion, and I'm working on it on what's next for me right now, and I'm going around and I'm getting a lot of feedback, and I'm getting a lot of perspective on my idea, and my goal is to poke holes and see if it still floats. And just last week, I had someone who he went to town on my idea, did not like it, and that's his point of view, and I understand his point of view.
Tell me how you really feel.
Yeah. But in ways, his point was don't do it. And my view was, okay, well, I have to overcome what his concerns are. And whether that means I don't do it, or it means I have to rethink that element of objection.
That wasn't even a caveat of don't do this, but if you're gonna, there was a ray of light of hope.
I'm not going to get into the idea too much, but it's an area I have a lot to learn about. Yeah. And the perspective was a very old school version of the way it's been done.
Yeah.
So it's important to note that, because I didn't understand how it's been done.
Yeah.
But my vision is again, a little bit more disruptive, a little bit more innovator's dilemma, being sprinkled in here again.
Well, but to build on that, when it came to when you would talk strategy and sort of direction, and even if you want to say strategic planning with you and Yov and senior members of the team and advisors, maybe, what was your approach to, okay, we want to go in this direction? Did you give yourself a certain amount of rope or time? Was it kind of a mindset of fail fast, fail forward, and then adjust, or was there mutual agreement, the first sign of potential failure, or if the following things happen, we pull the plug? How did you address those sort of situations between you and Yov?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. You got to break down that answer, because it I don't want to say it depends, because I hate that word, but it is all relative to the type of strategy that you're describing. So one of the things that Yov and I would do, as an example, is we'd go off, just the two of us sometimes, and brainstorm on the vision or revisit the grander vision. But when we were planning the fiscal year, or the kickoff, that was something that was being done with all of our senior leaders at the table. And then when you break that down to teams that you may run, in my case, I ran the marketing team for quite some time. You've got to then take that company vision, distill it down, and include people from the marketing team at the table for how we're going to go execute this vision. So it trickles down, and I think that's how everyone ends up getting, ultimately, this idea of a seat at the table. Now, The last comment I'll kind of throw here, and I've just gone through this, which was I just as I mentioned out of the gate, I've exited my involvement in the business day to day. I'm still an investor, but as the two of us were getting to the point where we knew we were going down that road, we needed to start to even further bring our senior leadership team into thinking about that long-term vision.
Mm-hmm.
And it was no longer how do we get them to rally and figure out what our fiscal objectives are, but how do we make sure that they have a vision that's going to be even better than what we may have had in mind because of the experiences that they had and what they brought to the table and the reality that we weren't going to be there, to address.
Does that speak to a culture you may have already established by that point? And what I mean by that is you and Yo might go off and do some brainstorming, and then come back and sort of disseminate some of that to certain teams, certain key people. But I'm just curious about how much was you and Yo disseminating, when I say downward, I don't mean disrespectfully, just, permeating the organizational structure versus how much of, I'll call it, ideas that might get, come to fruition and be implemented came upward. And it's easy when you're in a leadership role to be somewhat disconnected from the frontline feedback of clients and things like that. So I'm wondering how that...
It's a great point. And I think we did a good job at encouraging, through our core values and through also, just our connection, as you said, to customers to bring that up. One of our core values was, and still is today, it was an acronym, spelled LOVE, L-U-V. The U we were fond of because of Uberflip, of course. But it stood for listen, understand, and value. And it was this idea of actually taking feedback. And we talked about it both from the employee as well as from the customer. And one of the things that I think is so important for every company to have, if you don't have this today, is to have a CAB, or a customer advisory board. We had, a CAB for many years, and still at the end, had been implementing an updated one, to better capture different segments of users that we had grown into. And, that is, as to your point, it's a great opportunity to let customers start to dictate what that vision needs to be. Mm-hmm. Again, doesn't mean you have to listen to everything that they see they need, but you have to understand, that's where we said, listen, understand what they actually were asking for, what their problem was, and then figure out how to add value through that. So I think you make a great point, which is, it's not just about being the leader and setting the vision and never moving from that. You need to let the company grow and take the reins of it. And I'll tell you one last quick story here, which was very interesting. And it's funny, I haven't really talked about this, but so when Yob and I announced to our senior leadership team that we were leaving the company, and then there was a gap between telling them and telling the company as a whole. But we had this big messaging session that we were doing. People were flying in, we had a team that was dispersed across North America. We had various people flying in. And the question became like, should Yob and I really be at that session? We were going to be announcing in the week or so that followed the big news. And would it really make sense for us to be there or kind of let the room be? And we found a way for us to kick it off and then step aside for the next day and a half of it. And, just the feedback we got in terms of us not being in the room was so positive. Not that people didn't want us in the room, but that, more people felt comfortable, perhaps to, speak.
It's such a rare circumstance where it is about you, but to in some ways, kudos to you and Yob to have the forethought is like, it is about us, but maybe we shouldn't be there, and we should have.
It was interesting. It was, we all overthunk it, if you will, and ultimately, I think we, could have played it 6 different ways, but the way we played it, we heard some really good outcomes that people later understood why we chose not to be there the whole time, of course. But in the moment, even they were like, "This is kind of nice to have the room, to ideate."
Well, I mean, there's so many stakeholders that will need to be addressed. So yeah, there's I don't know if you know him, Jamie Stein, um, friend of mine. He was involved in the when ING Bank got bought by Scotiabank,
Okay.
and it was big. It's going to be a big announcement, but they not just to staff, but so many customers of ING who had been with ING because they were like they weren't like the rest of the banks, and now they're going to be part of basically, part of the big five, and like you could be the risk was customers would think, oh, now you're going to be just like the other banks, and so I'm no longer better off, and so they had to be preemptive in their messaging, and so I can only imagine in that the room with your team, thinking about how do we give people confidence that it's full steam ahead, it's not they're and all the comfort and confidence, I guess, is the way to put it. As we come to a close, one of my favorite questions of entrepreneurs is, what is the hardest decision you had to make in the business, and what did you learn from it?
That's a really hard question. I think there's so many tough decisions that you've got to make along the way, and I'm not going to cheat, but just rhyming off milestones that everyone's had to deal with in the last number of years, moving to remote work for many of us, dealing with tough financial, world realities at times, and the trickle of those.
How does it let go of good people?
Yeah. Listen, we had to do it. I don't know many companies that haven't had to as of late. So those are really things that I think weigh on you, because they change your culture in such significant ways. But for me, the most recent one was deciding to leave. Right? I mean, Uberflip is still something I love. It's still something. You look at my you look at my desk. Literally, it has like sweatbands, and my closet looks like I really like pink, which I do. That was a brand color. And even my kids. I've got 3 kids who grew up, and this is the vision that they had. I mean, they say things like, "I want to work at Uberflip one day." So that was a big decision. And what I ultimately realized was we had brought in a team that was doing a lot of the things that I love to do, and doing them better than I was going to do them at that stage. And I also started to get really curious about some other ideas, and that ultimately got me to realize that it was time for me to try something new. I'm still, as I mentioned, kind of poking holes at a couple of these ideas to make sure that it's what I want to do for my next 10 years or whatever might be ahead. But I would say that if you broaden this as a decision, to answer your question, I think it's starting a company and deciding how committed you are to that, and when it's time to start something new. I mean, that's a big decision, because it's not actually about you. It's about the people you're going to bring on, and the people you're going to bring on next, and making sure that it's something that you can have a succession plan for.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting, and I appreciate you being so candid about it, is to come to a point in time when you realize, as you described, there were people now in place that were doing a great job, and to your point, had the potential to take it even further than you could, maybe because of interest, passion, energy, whatever, however you want to categorize it. But now in the next chapter, you might have even greater clarity to know in the next chapter, oh, okay, that chapter lasted another 10 years, whatever, and now it's time for me to move into another chapter. I don't know. I mean, who knows what the future holds, but you have the luxury of I'll call it an informed perspective that many others don't. Because there's been a lot of founders that have been removed, whether they liked it or not, versus
yes,
being able to, shall we say, manifest the next chapter.
Yeah. No, listen, I'm lucky, and we had a board that we got to work with towards this decision. And and it's I think it's great for our customers where Uberflip sits. It's great for our employees. It's great for the customers ultimately. And I'm excited for what I'm going to do next. It's believe it or not, it probably might not be in MarTech, as weird as that is, but I'll still be a buyer of MarTech.
Okay. Okay. I have you back to talk about the next chapter when it's ready.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.